everybody. It's great to see you here again at the Gloucester stage, and it's certainly great to be back. Everybody at the Gloucester stage, thank you so much. Chris and Bob and the staff here, it's always a pleasure. We always have a full house, and I actually have to thank everyone who's sitting in the seats tonight. You show up show after show. I never take it for granted. I'm always grateful. So thank you for being in our audience. Thank you for being present for our storytellers. We have a fabulous show tonight. It's really great. Casey Breton, come on up, Casey.
There's a phrase I adopted in the last few years, although to say that I adopted it would imply that I wanted it or that I sought it, which isn't the case. The phrase is Mother of God. And when it spills out of my mouth, almost as if by accident, it sounds like this. Mother of God. It comes honestly from a place of desperation or exhaustion after something has happened that I wish hadn't. I say, Mother of God, when I don't know what the very next thing to do is in an awkward or unfortunate situation. For example, after I discovered my middle son, who was about 3 at the time, attached to our kitchen wall by means of getting his finger stuck in the hole of a metal wall bracket, classic case of small enough to get in, too big to get out. And he's like this, and it's swelling, and he's attached. Mother of God. Or on that morning in November 2016, when I woke up and found out who won the election. The first thing I did was gasp, OMG. Then cry some more. Then, Mother of God. If OMG is the moment of shock or discovery, then Mother of God, MOG, is when it sinks in. The MOG comes when you realize what it's going to take to clean up the mess after the OMG incident. Isn't that what mothers do? Clean up the mess. I don't know where I came up with the phrase. I didn't think it was a real phrase until I Googled it and discovered that it was, and that it probably has to do with the Virgin Mary. Being Jewish explains my ignorance on that subject. But when I hear myself saying, Mother of God, I definitely don't have Mary in mind, or any other virgin. What I do have in mind is this: an old woman, and she's wearing a house coat, and she's standing at the kitchen stove, and she's flipping French toast with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. And whatever you say to her, no matter how crazy it is, she'll say, honey, tell me something I haven't heard before, in a warm, gravelly voice. She might have a Brooklyn accent. She might sound like a cowboy. Either way, she's tough as nails. So I recently shared a story with her. I needed to talk to her, and I'll share it with you now. A few weeks ago, I was in a parent-teacher conference for a student of mine. I was teaching 2nd grade, and this is one of the nicest kids you'd ever meet, really sweet kid. And I figured the meeting with his parents would go about as easy as these conferences get. I would shower them with glowing remarks and show them his stellar work and tell them he's loved by all, and maybe throw in a good job, parents, and we would all go home happy. And it did start out that way. But after all of the glowing remarks, the father looked at me and said, "Can I ask you a question? Is our son happy at school?" And I could hear something was off in his voice. And I said, "Why do you ask?" And the father hesitates. But the mother jumps right in, and she says, "I'm not going to beat around the bush. Our son is coming home very unhappy. He's crying, he's in a bad mood, and he says he doesn't want to be friends with any of the other boys in the class." Now, I will admit it's a rowdy bunch. And so the fact that this kid is keeping a distance is probably a good idea. But I get it. At the end of the day, a kid needs friends. The mother continues, and she says, I want to tell you about a play date I arranged for my son and two of the boys from class. I took them to the movies, and they brought their iPhones, and they're sitting in the back seat of my car, and I can hear them cracking up on their phones about queefs. So this is where I pause to see how the room gets divided between the few of you who know what a queef is and those who don't. I didn't know what a queef was either. But luckily, the mother explains that a queef is a fart that comes out of the vagina. OMG. Not what I was expecting. I mean, here we are in these little chairs around this little table in a second grade classroom talking about vagina farts. So she continues to describe some more highlights from the play date, which include still in the back seat of her car and the boys on their phones, and they're looking up the world's biggest penis, and playing a game called Would You Rather, in which they're being asked questions like, would you rather date someone 10 years older or 10 years younger? I nervously chuckled and pointed out that means they would be dating someone -2. I didn't sleep very well that night, so I called her up. "Mother of God," I said, and she was there in her old house coat, standing at the kitchen stove. She's flipping French toast with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. And she says, "Honey, pull up a chair, tell me the whole story. I got nothing but time." So I did. I told her how disturbing it is to know that such young children have access to all the worst information at the touch of their fingers. And she looks at me and says, "Honey, I gotta tell you, big penises and vagina farts aren't the worst thing." I said, "I know, but this is second grade, and where do they go from here?" I told her how I share his parents' concerns, how I worry about my own young children and what they'll be exposed to, and how little control I have over any of it. I told her how thinking about all of this stuff just makes me angry and worried about the future. "Mother of God," I said, "what am I going to do? I'm supposed to meet with the parents of the queef boys tomorrow." She looks at me and says, "Honey, what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger." And I realize now, in those moments where I hear myself saying, "Mother of God," that what I'm doing is praying, not to God, but to the Mother of God, who's always there in her house coat, flipping French toast with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, always there to remind me that after the OMG comes the MOG. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. That was great. Our next storyteller is Deneen. Ann, come on up and tell a story.
The holidays are coming, and it put me in mind of Christmas stories. And naturally, of course, because I'm a pastor, I would think of that. And I decided to tell a Christmas story, a true Christmas story that happened the last year before I became ordained. And my family calls it the Christmas that I had my throat cut. And it was quite literal because I'd had surgery 2 weeks before Christmas on my thyroid, which I don't recommend for anybody going into any holiday of any religion. And, and like all holidays, one of the things that happens is that the mom needs to be in good health. The mom needs to feel good, and the mom needs to be able to cook. And I wasn't able to do any of those things that year. It hurt a lot. I had a lot of painkillers, which I wasn't used to taking. And that year, a lot of people were coming home to visit. My daughter was bringing her new fiancé home from Scotland for his first visit. And I was about the worst I could imagine in terms of my sense of hospitality. And because she was coming home with him, a lot of her friends decided to come as well. And so over the course of 2 weeks, we had many, many visitors that year, and not enough food. And I kept feeling like, you know how that is? I didn't have enough to feed them, and I was tired, and I was cranky, and I wasn't making a good impression. And I spent most of the time just wanting to cry. So 2 nights before Christmas, the crowd really got worse. The whole day, friends had been coming by. They wanted to meet her fiancé, and there was less and less food in the house. And all I could think of is there's more people. Where are we going to put them? How are we going to have them sleep? What are they going to eat? And I got more and more anxious, and my throat hurt, and the drugs kicked in. And it was kind of awful. And then at the very end of the day, the final visitor came, and it turned out to be her very best friend, whose name is Darcy. And Darcy walked into the house big with child. She was 8 months pregnant. She brought her husband, and the two of them, she was glowing. She just looked as beautiful as could be. And all I could do was want to run away. And so I went upstairs and started to cry, and I had my OMG moment. Because all I could think of was, how can you imagine that you're going to go off and get ordained to be a pastor when Mary and Joseph show up on your doorstep 2 nights before Christmas and you have nothing for them? You have no pity, no compassion, and no food. And so I stayed up there about 10 minutes, and a really, really sweet thing happened. I was crying, and Darcy came upstairs with her beautiful pregnant self and sat on the edge of the bed, and we talked. And I cried, and she patted me. And then the two of us went downstairs, and everybody kind of looked around. How was Mom going to be? And we went into the kitchen, and we found some old spaghetti, right? Spaghetti. And then somehow in the course of the evening, everybody forgave each other. And I've come to realize that even God did too, because I did actually end up getting ordained.
Thank you, Ann, and for doing that on such short notice. Ann's a trooper and a good sport. Thank you so much. I wish our next guest could just hold a yoga class right here for us all to, do a little stretching. Please welcome Janet Green Garrison.
Okay, so let's all take a deep breath. Okay. So go back with me to about 1973. I'm in my early 20s, and I've just returned to Pittsburgh, my hometown, after completing a 6-week yoga teacher training up in the Laurentian Mountains north of Montreal at the Shivananda Yoga Ashram with Swami Vishnu Devananda. And I knew I was on the right path. And I didn't know where it was going to take me, but I knew I was on the right path. So always trying to get out of Pittsburgh, I packed up my car and headed toward Cape Ann, because I had already discovered that there was an ocean going on, and I was in Pittsburgh. So my heart, I was totally clear that I was in love with Gloucester, and this is where I wanted to be. So I headed in this direction. It was early in the morning. I was on Route 80. Pennsylvania's a really long state. And I had to make a pit stop. It was about 8 in the morning. So I pulled into a generic Route 80 rest stop, and I walked in. I opened up the ladies' room door, and there's no one there but one other woman, about my age. And she's got one foot up in the sink, and a big backpack about this high, and a black furry dog sleeping next to the backpack. So in about 5 seconds, I take her in and the backpack and the dog, and I go, "You must need a ride." And she looks up, and our eyes meet, and she smiles, and she goes, so having just completed yoga teacher training camp, I knew that yogis and yoginis fasted and chose not to speak for days or weeks or lifetimes. And so I looked back at her and I said, "Well, me and my dog are out in the Volvo. We'll wait for you, okay?" And she said, she nodded. So out she comes. We toss her backpack into the back of my car. Her dog jumps in, and my dog and her dog get along great, and she gets in the front seat, and off we go. Well, if you've ever been around someone who's not talking, you feel like Chatty Cathy all of a sudden. So I'm not saying anything, and she's not saying anything, and we're driving along, and I offer her some cashews, and she likes that, and I offer her some apple juice, and she likes that, and I offer her a joint, and she likes that. So we're getting along just fine. And we get to the Delaware Water Gap, which was always my stop-off place between Pittsburgh and Woodstock. And we get out of the car, and this is like no talking, non-verbal. And we sit by the river and have some more stuff to eat. And then we just sit down, knee to knee, cross-legged, knee to knee. And I look at her, and she's looking at me. But we're not looking at each other's eyes. She's looking here at my third eye, my spirit eye, and I'm looking at hers. And I know for sure that I'm in the presence of someone who is much further along the path, the same path that I've just started. And remember Rolodexes? I didn't know what those are, fiefs or fifes or whatever those were. How many of you don't know what a Rolodex is? I think I'm talking to my crowd here. Remember those Rolodexes? Okay, this is what my mind was going at. She was just there. And my mind was going, okay, drop that thought. Okay, drop that thought. Okay, drop that thought. And it's just going. And I realized that she's just there, fully present, in a way I'd never experienced before. And she wasn't waiting for me to get there. She was just there. And we stayed that way. And then my eyes filled up and her eyes filled up, and tears just started coming down both of our cheeks. And we stayed that way for a while, and then we got up and got back in the car and headed on up to Woodstock, where my family had a house there, and there were some people there. And when we got to Woodstock, we came in the house, and I said to these folks, I said, look, I don't know her name. She's not speaking. I picked her up at a rest stop on Route 80, but I've named her Grace because she has completely graced my life. So I give her a bedroom, and the next morning she comes down for breakfast, and she's talking. And I find out that her name is Gaina Uransky, and Wednesday's her day not to talk. And I forgot to mention that she was in bare feet, so she was washing her feet because they were dirty in the sink back there. But she was in bare feet, and talk about a sadhu, a modern-day sadhu, traveling just with her dog, hitchhiking, in bare feet. I found out she was headed from Whippoorwill Holler outside of Nashville up to visit her grandfather on Monhegan Island. And her only timeline was to get back to the holler before her feet got cold. So that was my OMG moment when I sat with Gaina and got really clear that I could live a spiritual life because she was my inspiration. I called her on my way over here tonight. I said, how should I end this story? She said, I don't know, you can't end, it's not over. You can't end this story. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, for sharing that with us. I'm really excited for this next storyteller. A lot of you know him, Iain Kerr. Iain, thank you for being with us tonight. Come on up.
Thank you very much. Friends and family tell me I'm an optimist, a sort of cup half full type of guy. And I think if on top of your day job, you're going to buy a polluted paint factory and try to fix it up into an oceanographic research and innovation center, you got to be a cup half full type of guy. Anyway, my daytime job is that of a marine mammal scientist. And actually, I have a program that has been really quite successful over the last 2 years. And those of you that know me in this room are probably already cringing. And for those of you that don't know me, be advised when we leave this room, if you get within 10 feet of me, I will tell you all about it. And the program is actually called Snotbot. Okay, and Snotbot is this drone that's covered with Petri dishes, okay, and I fly it into the exhalation of a whale, all right, and the whale breathes all this biological goo, gets on the Petri dishes, and it comes back to us, and we're able to assess this biological information and do sort of a non-invasive health assessment. Imagine going to your doctor's office, sitting down, reading a magazine, and the doctor comes out 10 minutes later and says, you're in great health, go home. On one level, that's the idea. So in 2016, we took Snotbot up to Southeast Alaska. And this is a location I've been to before. I knew what was going on. And man, what a summer we had. You know, whales, the weather, the boat, the equipment. Actually, the food was a bit dodgy, but it was an amazing summer. And it might have sort of set me up for the fall, let's say. Because in the end of 2016, I get a call from National Geographic. And they say, Iain, do you think you can fly a drone into the exhalation of a whale on live TV? I'm like, bring it on. I mean, what could go wrong? You've got drones, whales, boats, weather, Alaska, the exuberance of youth. That was 2 years ago. Anyway. So the National Geographic show Earth Live was going to be a 2-hour show that was going to be on 6 continents, 16 countries, and about 18 locations. And we were going to be one of those locations. And it's pretty exciting for a small little Gloucester sort of nonprofit. And I had this vision in my mind based of last summer. We'd be out on the boat, you know what I mean? There'd be whales all around us, and the sun is shining, and they'd say, Iain, are you ready for your moment? And I'd be, yes, I'm ready. And I'd say, well, let's go for that whale over there, okay, and then action, and then I would sort of fly up to the whale. No, let's go for that whale over there. And, you know, I had this vision in my mind, and how far did I fall? We flew up to Alaska 4 days before the TV crew arrived, and it was blowing a gale. We then get to the location, no whales. Weather forecast is for torrential downpour on the day of the shoot, and I'm like, oh my God, you know. So, and then the Nat Geo team tell me, okay, now this is how it's going to work. They arrived with like 20 people and 100 bags, okay, and they have 3 teams. And team number 1 is on my boat with me, with a couple of cameras and links and cables everywhere, okay? Then the second team, believe it or not, is in an airplane. And then the third team is on the ground. And what's going to happen is they're going to beam the signal from the boat to the airplane to the shore station. And we would have a 20 square mile box to find a whale in for the show. I thought there'd be a satellite uplink on the boat, but now they're like, no, you don't have Southeast Alaska, you've got 20 square miles. And I'm feeling the pressure here a little bit. And actually, it got worse because on the day of the shoot, the weather ceiling was so bad, they said, Iain, we can't fly the plane. You now have a 5 square mile box. Now be advised, we didn't find a whale in the 20 square mile box. Anyway, we don't do the morning rehearsal because the weather's so bad, it's raining, and they don't want the drones to crash because then we'll have nothing. And actually, it's exciting. I find a whale, and I'm like, this is going to happen. I've got a whale, you know, and I'm finding the whale, and the director's like, turn the boat around. I'm like, but there's a whale. Turn the boat around. I'm why? He's like, you're leaving the box. And I'm like, but there's no show without a whale. And he's like, there's no show without a satellite uplink. So I'm like, oh, man. So I texted my wife, Amy, a little sort of sad emoji, you know. And I will say, by the way, that's the I'm very proud of her. I am more, sorry. Fishtails. Anyway, okay, back to Alaska. So we find the whale, the director sends me back, and we're really feeling the pressure. And then basically Nat Geo come up to me and say, Iain, sorry, mate, you know, we can't do this. They could see the writing on the wall. So they said, let me just tell you how it's going to happen, okay? Half an hour into the show, we're going to cut to you, and then you're going to take the drone off, okay? And then we're going to cut to another exciting segment, you know? And then if you can collect some snot later on, it won't be live, you know, but if you can do this, you know, it'll happen. It'll be good, and you'll have something. And honestly, we were devastated. I mean, it's a big deal, getting on National Geographic. So we say, okay, we can do this, you know, don't panic. So the time comes, and they go, actually, you know what I have to tell you? I'll tell you why I was heartbroken. So this was going out to, I think, whatever, you know, I remember I said something like 16 countries and whatever. I was really disappointed that they weren't going to be saying snotbot in 47 languages, you know. There was something about that that really appealed to me. Anyway, so back to the show, and they go 3, 2, 1, and I'm holding my binoculars up, and I go, oh, a whale? You know, no whale. Well, but we're on live TV now, and we're messing around with the drone, and they're talking about sort of snotbot. And then with a heavy heart, I will say, we launch the drone into the Alaska skies. And then sort of comes the question, would you rather be lucky or talented? And in my, thank you. In my case, thank God, it was lucky. Because I fly the drone from a little TV screen. There's a little camera on the drone, and I'm looking at that screen. And I'm looking at that screen, and a whale comes up in the screen. I'm like, holy shit, it's a whale, you know? Now, of course, I just said it was a whale. And actually, what was even more funny is the host in New York City said, a whale. And there were two hosts, and the other host said, where? And I went, wait a minute, hadn't I just, like the whale? Anyway, so the whale is there, and they don't cut away, and I fly up to the whale, and actually, I miss the first blow. And I'm like there, and I miss the second blow. And then in total panic, I get the next blow. And thank you. And what's actually funny is a friend of mine said to me later, did you do that, Iain, to build up the tension? I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? My hands were shaking. I was on live TV. Anyway, the Gloucester snot bot actually collected snot, was seen live around the world, and was actually voted one of the best segments of the show. And if you don't mind, I've got to have the final line. I flew back to the boat and literally texted my wife, OMG.
Let's go Snotbot in 47 languages. I have had such an amazing year with Phoebe Potts. Phoebe, come on up here. We have had so much fun. Phoebe has been the storyteller in residence this year, and it's just been so great. And all of our conversations were wonderful. We laughed, and we didn't cry. I don't think we cried, not once. No. We laughed a lot, and we just came up with wonderful ideas and just conversation. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I want a very nice warm round of applause for this local treasure who makes this possible, Maureen Aylward.
Thank you. Thank you. I honestly love doing this because I get to meet so many wonderful people, and they all make me laugh usually, and they make me cry. But Phoebe, thank you so much for being storyteller in residence this year, and we're going to hear a great story coming up from you right now.
Great, thanks. No pressure. I didn't intend to become a professional Jew. It wasn't part of some well-charted career path. But my day job is running the Sunday school here at our local synagogue. One of the more challenging parts of my job is talking with parents about how to prioritize their children's religious education over soccer. So a composite conversation would sound like this. Phoebe, we're a skiing family. From January through March, our kids aren't going to be at Sunday school. Is that okay? And I say, well, what can I say? I say, yeah, no, totally. I get it. Like, what's at stake? It's just their souls, right? It's like, no big deal. One of the more delightful parts of my job is talking with children about God and about Torah. I'm not squeamish about talking about God because I can rest on the socialist, secular Judaism in which I was raised, which makes it really simple. There is one God, and we don't believe in him. But if I were hard-pressed, I do believe in God. I believe in God when I'm on an airplane. Because I think God hates planes. I think God sees planes as a sign of our hubris. And when I'm in a plane and we hit turbulence, I feel his irritation. I feel like he's saying, you're such a big shot. The earth isn't good enough for you. How about I shake you around like dice in a cup? I believe in God. God hates planes. I am terrified of flying. So, many of you know that Jeff and I adopted our baby from Ethiopia. What you may not know is that at the time, our State Department's guidelines were that we had to do this in 2 trips. Of all the sort of ghastly facts of that scenario, the one I want to point out tonight is that a flight to Addis Ababa from Boston is 17 hours. So, when we were doing our travel plans, I was emphatic that we fly with Lufthansa, the German airline. And Jeff said, why? The other ones are cheaper. And I said, the Germans are going to be on time. Their aircraft are going to be well maintained. And let's face it, they owe us a baby Jew or 2 or 6 million. So we fly to Ethiopia, we adopt the child, and then at the end of our stay, we're told to leave because now the State Department will take over and investigate the case. So we're told to leave, and we leave the baby in capable, loving hands, but we leave the baby. And as we're loading up the taxi, I feel as though my heart is being shucked out of my chest. And I cry, and I cry, and I cry, and 4 new organs grow in its place, each one more anxious and horrified than the next. One of them is saying to me, you've been a mother for 24 hours, and your first maternal act is to leave the country. The second one says, yeah, and you're going to die on the plane, so then the baby will have lost his mother twice. The third one says, what happened to you? What happened to all your good white people, middle class advocacy skills? Since when do you take any shit from the State Department? Like, why aren't you fighting? And the last one is just wailing, we're gonna die, we're gonna die, we're all gonna die. So by the time I get to the gate with Jeff, I'm like a live mackerel on a plate. My eyes are like big and glassy, and my mouth is down like this. And I'm clapping. And just then the Lufthansa flight crew walks in. They're all blonde and blow-dried. They're like this Teutonic parade of health and goodwill. And they all wave, hello, hello. And I suppose it's very well rehearsed, so I suppose it's meant to inspire confidence, but I just get worse. My top 2 stories are now flooded, and my internal selves are just throwing furniture out the windows. And Jeff takes my hand and says, it's gonna be okay. And I guess the internal people really like Jeff because they stop the evacuation and they all go, Jeff. And we follow him onto the plane. But as we ascend into the darkness, the plane bucks and yaws and kicks. It's like we're hitting roadkill at 200 miles an hour in all directions. And the flight attendants start serving the drinks, the Cuba Libre, whiskey sour. And the ice is clashing everywhere. And so I say, I guess a little too loudly, I say, respect the turbulence. And I look over at Jeff for comfort, except this time Jeff looks back at me and he gives me this weak smile and he does this Finding Nemo, like, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Which is really too bad because now I'm terrified and I don't like my husband anymore. I don't like him for 2 reasons. The first reason is I resent the Disney reference. Disney hates mothers, hates them, murders them all before the movie even starts sometimes, or at least within like the first 20 minutes of the film. Bambi, Dumbo, Cinderella, Snow White, Ariel, Belle, Elsa, Anna, Nemo, you name it, Disney has killed off the mother. Because I guess you can't become who you're meant to be and share your magic with the world if boring old mom is around mucking up the storyline. The other reason I don't like Jeff is because he's afraid too. But he's not afraid of a fiery death at 30,000 feet. He's afraid that his wife is going to cause a scene. And I'm thinking, we just adopted a child, and all the empirical data that we have on children so far is that they cause scenes. Like, not just at the beginning, like the entire time you know them. And I'm going to co-parent with this guy. Fantastic. So, the flight attendant leans in and says, "Something to drink?" And I say, "Why, to toast our deaths?" And Jeff boxes me out and says, "Can I get a scotch? Neat." And then he just sits there and he sips, staring straight ahead like I'm some wingnut commuter that he has to sit next to for the rest of his life. I'm out of options, and I'm so scared, and I can only hear the agonized wails of the 4 new beings inside me. And so I put in a call to the boss. I say, "I can't do this alone. Please help. Please help get us home so that we can come back and do our jobs." And we had just pulled up out of the Rift Valley, which is the great, lush vagina source of all human life on planet Earth. And just due north of us is, right up at the other end of the Nile, is Canaan, the birthplace of God. So I wonder now if the reason I got such a swift response was because it was a local call. Because as soon as I send out my supplication, I read a voice in my head, and the voice reads, "You're not alone. I did help." The voice is annoyed. "I did help. I made the scientist who made those pills." So the pills that the word voice is referring to is a few weeks before I was at a Boston hospital getting shot after shot after shot for all the immunizations you need to go to East Africa. And to break the monotony of all the needles, I say, "Hey, doc, ha, 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 do you have anything in there that can immunize me from being a shitty mother?" And he looks at me and he says, "Is this your first child?" And I said, "Yeah." And he scribbles something down, and later that day, as I'm picking up our malaria medication at the Walgreens, I'm also handed a little sack of lorazepam. Lorazepam, for those of you who are not Jewish or Jewish adjacent, is in the benzo family. It's kind of like the maiden aunt to Valium. And okay, so I made the scientists who made those pills. So I hit Jeff on the arm, and I say, "Sweetie, open the thing with the zipper and the thing with the small one. There's the small pills. They're really little and white." And Jeff, that devilishly handsome, whip-smart, loyal, loving life companion, jumps to his feet with cat-like reflexes, secures the pills, hails down Fräulein Lufthansa for a glass of water, delivers it to me, and in just a few moments, I've ingested them, and it's as though I've unleashed a team of thick-ankled nuns who have stormed the orphanage of my central nervous system, and they're tying each of my mutinous selves down with these nice fat restraints. It's like Madeline in 2 straight lines. I levitate out of my seat. I give Jeff a kiss on his head. I float down the aisle to the galley where the flight attendants are cooing softly. I float toward the one with the really large bosom. I'm to take a nap in her breast. And she looks up at me, hovering over her, and she says, "Sit down." I comply. I go back to my seat. The Sahara Desert unfurls beneath us. We bank west of the Nile. Everybody plugs in to spend the next 2 hours with Julia Roberts in a movie co-starring her teeth. But not me. My center of gravity has me listing east, pulling me toward the rising sun, pulling me towards my son. Thank you.
As I mentioned, Phoebe is our 2018 Storyteller in Residence, and guess what? We have a 2019 Storyteller in Residence. And Phoebe is going to introduce him and pass the hook, which we don't have here tonight, but you can, it's a metaphorical hook. So.
All right. I'll be honest, I'm sad. I like this gig. But we are... But it's really good news. So I wouldn't have even known about this had it not been for our next storyteller. And it's a great honor to have been passed this title from the Venerable Right Honorable Jim Dowd. And this is very exciting. Our next storyteller is a very clever person, a great writer, and an extremely nice guy. So please put your hands together for Adam Kuhlman.
I'm really glad that the hook was not here tonight because it's the only thing scarier than having to follow Phoebe. So the title of this story is Come Again? I shall. I'm such a small person. Maybe I should take advantage of this opportunity to ask somebody to raise it, or no? Okay, here I am. The title of this story is Come Again. If the woes of Amelia Bedelia have taught us anything, it's the danger in taking the words of an authority figure too literally. For a fictional cartoon made, the stakes tend to be low enough. When Amelia heeds a request to dress the chicken, her obedience results in nothing worse than a raw bird wearing a snug Kelly green romper. But for a real-life 7-year-old boy, the consequences of literal acceptance can be more profound, particularly when the authority is one's mother. In my case, a warm and accommodating woman who never missed an opportunity to tell me how special I was. Which is why I ended up believing, for a few weeks at the close of first grade, that I was the second coming of Jesus Christ. You may be thinking, just a minute, Adam, how do you get from boilerplate maternal flattery to the conviction that you are the Son of God? It's a reasonable question. So I will explain it in the way I know best, by blaming a host of other people. In the late 1980s, 2 cultural trends took root in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. First, there was the self-esteem movement, a pop psychology craze that led children to be commended for virtually every deed, like putting shoes on the correct feet, or covering the cement floor with pillows before pushing their little sisters down the basement stairs. Among the self-esteem boosters, school teachers were an especially enthusiastic lot, and mine had reason to be proud. By the spring of first grade, I had mastered single-digit addition, except for sums involving the number 8. 8s were distracting with their look of half-assed snowmen, so this wasn't my fault, Miss Thomas assured me. Instead, she plied me with grape-scented stickers bearing the word perfect. For a child, it isn't such a leap from there to divine. The other trend was the mainstreaming of Christian evangelicalism. It was the decade of doomsday prophets, including one who inspired the Trinity Broadcast Network to televise a clock, ticking down the hours we had left. Settling onto their sofas after supper, families bickered over their choice of evening entertainment: Golden Girls or the inexorable approach of Holy Armageddon. While the suburbs of Richmond may not be Appalachia, we were close enough to feel the squeeze of the Bible Belt. Even before the God boom, everyone knew at least one cousin who spoke in tongues. Everyone had a friend whose pet snake was both a companion and, when poked with a stick, a test of solidarity with the Holy Spirit. For me, that friend was Jeffrey Leary. In our neighborhood, his mother was rumored to possess spiritual gifts, evangelical lingo for the ability to perform small miracles. Nevertheless, and despite lavishing it with a thick coat of Vaseline every morning, she never succeeded in healing young Jeffrey of his chronically chapped upper lip. Until getting to know the Learys, my own religious feelings had been lukewarm. I looked at my family's Methodist church mainly as an opportunity to indulge my interest in fine men's tailoring. Typically, coaxing a 7-year-old boy into a jacket and tie requires a napkin doused in chloroform. I, on the other hand, begged my mother to take me to the formal section of J.C. Penney, where I combed the racks for just the right Harris tweed blazer. This I reserved for 2 equally sacred occasions: the 11 o'clock church service and whenever MTV played the song "Puttin' on the Ritz" by the Dutch new wave artist Taco. Dancing along to the jaunty beat, I'd toss the blazer just so over my left shoulder, while my father looked on in horror. In retrospect, I see it was my flouting of certain gender norms that overcame my parents' misgivings about the Learys' Pentecostal church, the West End Assembly of God. They didn't mind helping me to pack for a sleepover at Jeffrey's when they knew I'd be getting a strong dose of Christian morality in the morning. I can imagine my father thinking, as he carefully stowed my tweed in a hanging garment bag, "A little fire and brimstone couldn't hurt." Indeed, for me, fire and brimstone were the draw. Gone was my Methodist pastor's lifeless readings from the Gospel of Luke. In their stead were heart and pulpit-pounding salvos from the book of Revelation, descriptions of ghastly fates in store for mankind. According to Scripture, one angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and the sun was allowed to scorch people. Somehow, this savage imagery made little impression on Jeffrey, who sat next to me doodling on his bulletin. Meanwhile, with wide eyes, I'd watch light stream through stained glass onto the uplifted hands of the worshipers, housewives in rayon jackets, dentists in polyester shirts. Geez, I'd think, if flames do come licking from the sky, those synthetic fabrics, they won't stand a chance. Revelation also predicted there would be an angel come down from heaven who would seize Satan and bind him for 1,000 years. According to literalist interpretation, this angel was Jesus, impatient with the hash we've made of things, returning to give it another shot. And when might Christ drop in? Who might he be? Well, I was told he might already be here, walking and talking among us. From my vantage point, tucked in a pew near the back, I'd evaluate the congregation. The feathered hairstyles, the shoulder pads and loud prints. If Christ were here, in his infinite perfection, surely he'd show some class. Surely he'd choose something tasteful to wear. Maybe, I thought, caressing my lapel, a classic herringbone tweed. Discovering that you are most likely the Lamb of God would be difficult for anyone to keep under wraps. much less a first grader. But I sensed the humble, Christ-like thing would be to wait and test my hypothesis. The Bible I knew had ascribed certain miracles to Jesus, acts of healing and exorcism mostly. If I could just duplicate these feats, it would serve as proof for those with reason to be skeptical, such as the Latimer twins, third-grade boys who spent recess time picking me up and throwing me into thorn bushes. Alas, it wasn't easy to find volunteers with diseases to cure. Way back, around 0 AD, there were lepers enough to test every would-be Messiah. But in 1988, even a grandpa with dropsy was hard to come by. When school let out for the summer, Jeffrey's church filled the void with something called Vacation Bible School. As a 7-year-old, I saw nothing strange about this branding strategy. I mean, it's one thing to start with an oxymoron like vacation school, but then in the hopes of selling the idea to children to sandwich the word Bible in between. Still, West End Assembly of God had a reputation for pulling out all the stops. Come Christmas time, they would embellish their live nativity scene with actual camels, who stole the show from the three kings by depositing their own gifts at the feet of Mary and Joseph. Vacation Bible School did not disappoint. There were songs, crafts, and New Testament puppet shows, which typically concluded with 2 bearded felt apostles conducting an altar call, urging us to be born again in the Spirit. It was like Sesame Street, if only Bert and Ernie summoned eternal hellfire upon those unwilling to share their cookies. But for me, the highlight was the open-air biblical bazaar. Set up in the church's courtyard, it was a collection of wooden stalls operated by parents in period garb, vendors hawking lemon bars and religious trinkets. There were carnival games, too, adapted to suit the setting, including a dunk tank, giving children the chance to drench the devil in murky green holy water. I considered using the tank as a showcase of my mastery over Satan. It would have been dramatic to herald the return of Christ and the initiation of mankind's final judgment with a skillfully tossed beanbag. But the task seemed too easy. 3 out of every 4 kids were hitting the target. And besides, everyone could see that the infernal creature in cherry red spandex was just Ryan Foster's overweight dad. Like any exercise in capitalism, the biblical bazaar circulated its own currency, gold nuggets the size of olives that children carried in a church-issued burlap sack. 3 nuggets might buy you a baked treat. 2 nuggets were enough for a turn at the purity ring toss. And since this was Reagan's America, there could be no handouts. Instead, we children obtained gold nuggets through pious deeds, such as reciting long passages of Scripture by heart. The younger kids tended to blow through our meager earnings faster than we could memorize. My friend Jeffrey was particularly wasteful. He might empty his burlap sack for little more than a basket of corn fritters. And by mid-morning, he would be in dire straits, forced to join a scrum of tiny mendicants who hassled the older, smarter kids for cast-off nuggets. To me, it was plain these prodigal sons and daughters were in need of a savior. Earlier that week, in my omniscience, I discovered the nuggets were not gold at all. A persistent fingernail could scratch flecks of paint from what I alone realized was nothing more than common landscape stone. Now, seeing Jeffrey's desperation, I hatched a plan, a miracle. Ambitious for a common 7-year-old, perhaps, but not for a fun-sized Jesus. When I returned to Vacation Bible School the next day, I was wearing my baggiest pair of jams. They were cinched tight against the weight of a few dozen stones I'd scavenged from driveways. And having gotten into the stash of spray paint my father kept in our shed, I also carried about my small person the distinctive scent of those who huff industrial solvents. True, the marigold yellow I'd settled on wasn't a perfect match, but I doubted this would trouble Jeffrey or my other soon-to-be disciples. I guess what I had in mind was a modern-day feeding of the multitude. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus miraculously satisfied the hungry with nothing more than a few loaves and fishes. I, his beardless, bowl-cut manifestation, would appease the greedy with my counterfeit gold. Waddling toward the bazaar, my pockets swaying like saddlebags, I imagined the whole scene. My jams would yield an endless bounty. Amid gasps and shrieks, the throng would cry out, "How? Why? Who are you?" And then, borne upon the shimmering pedestal of my generosity, at last I would reveal myself as Christ. Come again. The book of Revelation doesn't elaborate on the protocol for handling a newly substantiated Messiah, but I figured there would be some type of press conference. The cameras clicking away as my flock washed and anointed my feet. Eventually, I found Jeffrey and several others skulking around the banker's tent, where kids were emerging with the spoils of their biblical scholarship. Some show-off, he told me, had just recited an 80-word verse from the book of Esther. Nervously, I offered Jeffrey the first stone, still tacky with bright yellow paint. He didn't take it. Rather, his eyes flicked from my hand and onto my bulging pockets. The Gospels suggest that though Mary must have told him he was special, Jesus was close to 30 before he let the cat out of the bag. And with the way our world often treats our dreams and delusions, it's not hard to see why. By the time the kids were done with me, racing off to buy popsicle stick crucifixes and jellied donuts, I was left in a tearful heap upon the ground. Clothing torn, knees bloodied, I was more Christ-like than before. But I didn't feel exceptional any longer. Instead, I took my rightful place among the fallen, destined never to be so obedient to Mom or to God again. Thank you.